Kids church.
Goodbye, kids. We love you. We're excited to be with you guys. So like Brad said, we're Anthony and Abigail Freeze. I'm on staff with Young Life. We've talked about that before. And then Abigail is a volunteer leader through the ministry. We're just so grateful to be a part of this church. It is kind of hilarious that we've been going here for how long? Like 4 or 5 months. And we've now been up here a handful of times. So maybe we'll retire after this. I don't know. But so we are in our evangelism series right now. And last week, Stephen kicked it off talking about the incarnation. And how we see it is the next few weeks, this week and next week, like all of this is not like individual sermons, but kind of one thing all together over the course of 3 weeks. But Stephen shared the scripture, John 1:14, the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. And how beautiful it is that God loves us so much that he sent Jesus ultimately to die on the cross for us, but to be with us, to meet us where we're at in the midst of all that. He continues to meet us where we're at. And he invites us, God invites us to meet other people where they're at. So we're going to talk about that today, what it looks like in relationships to practice the incarnation, to do incarnational ministry, and what it looks like to show up. The question that Stephen asked a handful of times last week is, who have you pitched your tent among? Because God has invited us to incarnate among people. And we know that we are already around people all the time. We have different places. What we say here at Delco are areas of accountability. So places that we are consistently at. Whether that's coffee shops or your place of work, your place of school, all those kinds of different spaces, you are uniquely put there, and God can use you in that space. So we get to talk about that. We're really excited. Abigail, will you pray, and then we'll kind of kick it off.
Hey, Jesus, I thank you for this morning. I thank you for everyone that is here, that we just get to dive into what does it mean for us to be a part of what you are doing, God, that is not our works, but what you have been doing, and that we just get to be a part of it, and that is a blessing. I thank you for what you are doing and the way that we get to share this morning, the ways that you have worked in our lives. We love you, and in your name, amen.
God is so gracious to let us even just be a part of ministry and in being with people. I think about when Jesus called the first disciples and he invited them to be fishers of men, and they had no idea what they were doing. They didn't really even know what it looked like to be a Christian, but he brought them along and showed them the way. And similarly, I think he invites us to do that as well. So in Young Life, which is primarily a high school ministry, and that's our primary context is Delaware Hayes High School. We use, we have a lot of kind of weird language, but one of our kind of big phrases that we say is contact work. And so it's fun because there's a handful of Young Life alumni in the room, which is awesome. But contact work is this phrase we use to describe living out the incarnation. So describing really this verse of as Jesus made his dwelling among us, that we would do the same thing, that we would live among people. And so in the context of high school ministry, a lot of that is meeting students where they're at and not just having them come to us, but going to where they're at. So we don't want to just be, and we have the same heart here at Delco, but that we don't want to be a church that this is where we exist, right here, Sundays, here we meet at the Dream Center, and that's it, and we're done, and see you guys next week. We want to exist in a way where we are going out, where we are meeting people where they're at, that God is working in and through us as we go to the rest as we share every Sunday about our heart for this whole city. So similarly, when we think about high school ministry in our context, a lot of that is where we meet students where they're at. A lot of it is showing up at dismissal when school lets out and trying to meet students and see students we know. It's showing up in the student section at sporting events. It's coaching sports, different things where students that I know right now would not be comfortable stepping foot into any really Christian setting, whether that's a youth group or a church or whatever. We get to go and bring Jesus to them. So we're going to talk about 3 practicals in how we live this out, and how we aim to live it out ultimately, and how we as a church can take hold of this. This is not just specific to Young Life. It's not specific to what we're doing. It's ultimately the call that God has for all of us. The book that Stephen referenced last week that I liked a lot, it's called 9 Arts of Spiritual Conversations, right? Okay. And I was trying to find this quote in there, but I could not find it. But it says that, it talks in there that we are missionaries disguised as baristas, as teachers, as accountants, as all these different things. That we aren't just those occupations, we aren't just people that are existing there, but that God has invited us into something greater in that specific space, And it's funny for me to say because I'm in full-time vocational ministry, but still, and as Abigail does have a secular job, if you will, we do see that is God's heart for us. So the 3 practicals that we're going to talk about are being prayerful, being consistent, and taking risks. So we'll tell some stories, but we'll first talk about being prayerful. Seth is going to hit on this more next week, but when we think about showing up, you have to pray first and foremost. That's the baseline, that's the foundation of what you're doing. And so much of showing up and being present in the lives of other people is a step of faith in asking God, okay, what are you doing here? So some things with prayer is, and the book actually hits on this as well, but asking God where he already is working, asking him to just show you what he's doing already. I think oftentimes it's like, God, give me eyes to see what you're doing. What is it that you're doing? Reveal to me. Asking him to show you that. It also looks like dreaming big, having a heart for a place. I shared this the last time we came up and spoke, but when we moved to Delaware, it was in January of 2020, and then COVID shut the world down like 2 months later. It was really frustrating and weird, but what was really good for that is still bearing fruit in our hearts and in our ministry is how much time we just had to pray, and that was the only thing we could do. And it shifted our mentality when it comes to ministry. I think also with prayer, oftentimes it looks like desperately calling out to Jesus, asking for help, asking for vision, for him to soften your heart for a place. I think about Abigail is really awesome about praying about this, but praying that God would just give her the heart for Delaware Hayes, the heart that he has for that place, that he would soften her heart to it. When I go to school, whether it's showing up for practice or showing up at dismissal, trying to hang with students, I try to pray before I go into school in my car, pray afterwards, but then even as I'm walking through the halls, I'm like, Jesus, what are you doing? Jesus, I'm really uncomfortable. Jesus, this is super awkward. God, why is no one looking at me? But yeah, and I think even in that, and what we've learned is that like so much of this is what God is doing in our hearts, and hopefully he does do big things in the way that we show up in relationships. But what means probably more is what he's doing in us. Yeah. Something else that has been significant for me is praying for students and people we know praying for them by name. And that has been a really cool thing when you pray for someone consistently, whether you've just met them or known them for a while, but then you see them again. Seeing a student that I prayed for the past week gets me so excited to talk to them. I have so much more confidence and courage to go up and speak with them, even if I've only met them once, because I've spent time thinking and praying about them. And I'm trying to figure out, okay, what is God doing here? There could be something significant that's happening. I don't know, but I get to go almost see God reveal it before my eyes. And I think for me, like, I want to take intentional steps, trying to live this out in other areas of my life. I think that Delaware Hayes, like, every time I show up at Hayes, even if I'm driving past the school, God has just put it on my heart. Like, I got to pray for that school. But I want to live that out everywhere I am in life. That whether I'm at certain coffee shops consistently or different places where I'm always, I realize, I'm always at Kroger at this time or whatever it is, like trying to see, okay, how can I be more aware, God, to what you're doing here? Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about is being consistent. So a story that comes to mind for me is where I did ministry in college. There was a student that I saw from afar when I would just show up at the school. His name is Albert, and he's really fun. But I saw him from afar, and one of the first times I ever saw him, my heart just kind of jumped for him, and I was like, well, I don't know what God's doing here, but I think there's something. One of the first times I ever saw him, I don't think we had ever talked yet, I turned to a student that I was close with who was following Jesus, and I said, I think Albert's going to come to know Jesus. And that was pretty bold and crazy, but it was cool. Over the course of the next few years, being consistent was such a big part of what God was doing, and getting to just see, okay, what are you doing, Lord? What are you doing in this school and in this place, and then in this lives of specific students like my friend Albert. So consistently showing up, and I would just see him at dismissal almost every day that I was there. And eventually I started praying for him and then built up the courage to go up and talk to him. And then we quickly just kind of had this relationship. And it's not like we really spent much time outside of school. I just saw him like 2 or 3 days a week for months. And then I started going to tennis matches, and it turns out he played tennis. So then I would see him at all his tennis matches. And it was hilarious because it would get to the point where, like, he would be in the middle of a tennis match, he would like turn over and he would like wave to me. I'm like, dude, focus up. You're in first doubles right now. This is a big deal. But what was crazy is that then slowly but surely, like, we built this relationship. And then after we built this relationship, he started coming around in Young Life. And then he ended up coming to camp with us years later after I initially met him. And he said yes to a relationship with Jesus. And it was crazy because it kind of hit me, like, thinking back to who he was and who, even just my view of him. And like 2 or 3 years prior, and what God did in my heart that whole time, and what God did in his life. And just really was a gift. And such a picture that, like, we have to be prayerful and show up, and then God is going to do the rest. That's really all he's asking, is for us to be prayerful and be present.
Another thing I think of, like, when I'm thinking of consistency is, like, I think that my first reaction is, like, kind of frustration, because I'm like, I don't have that much time and life is really busy. And so I'm like, God, like, how does that work with being consistent when we have a lot of other things going on? And I think that when I'm thinking about that, one of the ways that God has, like, revealed to me of, like, it's okay, I'm going to provide that time in spaces where you think is, like, not there. So if that makes sense, one of the ways that I've seen that is just, right now I'm not working full time, but when I was in the office, I would have this like hour lunch break. And a lot of people would, go off and do their own thing. But something cool that happened about like 2 years ago, my coworker and I kind of just it just kind of happened, but we started getting lunch every day together in our company's like little lunchroom, and it has turned into like my favorite part of the day was when we got to have lunch together. And she's like 45, and so she has kids that are like my age, which is just hilarious. But now, like consistently over the past 2 years, we've been getting lunch, and so I've gotten to talk through life, like my own life, but also her life, of like her contemplating getting a divorce, and her children having really big things happen in their lives, and same with me, of like really big things happening in my life. And we've got to I just have gotten the opportunity to ask her questions, and I have been really blessed by that relationship, and I think that she has been blessed by like our friendship, and I've seen God just work in ways that I didn't expect, right? Like I didn't expect that to happen like during our work day, but because we don't have a lot of time, like I have seen God like provide time in spaces where I don't necessarily think that would happen, right? And so that has been really cool to be like, I am just going to give my time to you, Lord, and see what He has like made of it when I think that there isn't any. And then when I'm also like thinking about consistency, I'm thinking about like even in that relationship and others of like how that builds trust. Because if I was an inconsistent friend, she probably wouldn't have wanted to like share those things with me. And the same with like high schoolers. Anthony and I were talking about this, and it's like sad but like true, and kind of funny of like how I like don't know how many girls have been in my car that have like been crying over a boy. That's just like what life is. And so, but because I have been a consistent friend, it feels like a comfortable, safe space for them to cry over like a boy, right? Like, so that consistency there of friendship like really helps build the trust, which wouldn't necessarily happen if it was I saw them sporadically once every month, and so how can we be intentional with the spaces that we're in of like, okay, I'm not going to go to 1,000 different places to try to share Jesus. What does it look like just for me to like go to the same places that I live in and just surrender that to the Lord and see what He's going to do with that? And like I think what is cool, especially like in my job too, or just the different places, is that I think that I don't have to be like the one that's like really trying to like be groundbreaking. It's like I'm just really trying to be like, what's God doing here, and how can I go alongside Him? And in ways where it like feels like things fall in my lap, right? Where I'm not like really, and maybe that's like me not being as intentional. So I want to like work on that. But also like I do think that just being open and aware, then like God is going to like reveal those things to you. Like, oh, what about this little place? For you to like be intentional, which has been cool. Yeah. Anything else on consistency? Then like talking about taking a risk, it just like is uncomfortable. Like it's really uncomfortable to sometimes bring up Jesus for the first time to people that you're like, I'm not really sure where they are with their faith or what they think about Jesus or the Bible. So it can just be really uncomfortable. And that's like where we get to like, again, the prayer thing is just the foundation of like God can and will give us the confidence and know that our value is not in what people think, but what He thinks. But we can be taking risks. And with that is just like asking intentional questions or like asking to pray for someone. I think where I've seen like cool things, again, at work, and I don't think I've really fully taken advantage of this, but like my work at least does like a ton of like work events or happy hours or like whatever it is. And sometimes I'm like, oh, I don't want to go to that. Like, I just want to get out of here. But it is cool that like those are spaces where people feel more comfortable and have their guard down more versus like during the workday. And so like taking risks, of even just like asking about their lives. Like I genuinely feel like I know my manager really well, because I really want to just hear about her life and ask her questions. And I don't know like how many people are really doing that for one another, or like really want to hear the hard things. And so I feel like I've seen God show up in how we like have. I also feel like I have a really cool friendship with my manager, because I just really am just asking questions. Like I haven't really been like, hey, I go to church, want to come? But I really have been like, hey, that sounds really hard. Like, what's going on? Or it feels like you're kind of sad. Like, what's up? So that's been really cool. And yeah, or like I think about like the beginnings of meetings. How like there's always just this awkward like kind of like, okay, we're waiting on the last guy. We'll give him 2 more minutes to show up. And how can we utilize that space, like those 2 minutes, to be like, how's your day going? I've seen the Lord use that of like, again, like if I wasn't willing to like ask questions in those spaces, then like I probably wouldn't know my coworkers as well as I do. And again, that's not like me. I think that's just like the Lord giving me boldness of trying to take advantage of the time I do have with them. And because that's probably not my first instinct, is I would probably be like, all right, I'm just going to check my email. But because the Lord is moving and active, like we get to take advantage of those spaces, which is really cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I think in those moments, being prayerful is what helps us being able to take a risk. I think about moments, whether it's in the student section or hanging around at dismissal after school, just being like, all right, God, we're doing this, and I know you're with me, and it's going to be awkward, and here we go. And then you just compliment a kid for their shoes and then say, what's your name? And then you just go from there. Something else that happened recently that was encouraging to me is Jordan and I went to Ohio Wesleyan a couple weeks ago, I think it was their first day of classes, and we went and just passed out donuts and just try to see, okay, who can we meet, who can we say what's up to? And there was a student that I met a handful of years ago who had some interest in being involved with Young Life in some capacity, and just playing a couple sports and just really involved with that stuff. And but we got reunited. This was the first time I've seen him in a really long time. And it was so encouraging because very quickly we were able to just talk about what's going on, and got to hear how he's doing with Jesus and what God's doing in his life, and how he's quit one of his sports, and ultimately because he thinks God's doing something. And we've now hung out a handful of times, and it's one of those things where like us getting to show up there, like that ultimately I think is how I got to be reconnected with this guy. And so God's just doing a really cool thing in him senior year now. And we met, like we hung out like the first week of his freshman year kind of thing. So it's been a really long time. And God is just doing something there. And I'm grateful for the risk that we got to do, that Jordan and I got to take together, and what God was doing in that. So as we close with this time, then we'll give a decent amount of time for our response. And Abigail's going to set that up. But as we close, part of the joy in all of this is that we don't know what's going to happen, and that it's a journey with God and what he's doing in our lives and in our hearts, that we get to just increase our faith in him, knowing that he is at work and he is there with us and he's living inside of us. And we might fall on our face, and that's probably going to happen, but that's okay. And God invites us in that, and he's there with us in that as well. It's such a gift of his grace that he even lets us be a part of this. We get to just live into who he's calling us to be. And I think that's the beauty of it too, as Colossians 1:27 says, Christ in you, the hope of glory. And as we just live out who God is inside of us, that ultimately is enough. That as we have the confidence and the boldness to live out who God has called us to be in the unique spaces and places that God has put us in, He's going to work there. And when I think about our church body, it's so beautiful to think even just the reach that we have across Delaware with the different neighborhoods we're in and the different places, but then also the different workplaces and different people who work in the schools and the random connections that people have. And God is doing something with that. And we get to just be in the midst of that. We get to be missionaries disguised as whatever we're doing there. So I'm going to pray, and then Abigail is going to introduce what we're doing for our response time.